Hello and welcome to the Leaders in Cleantech podcast. Each week our host David Hunt speaks to a leading startup CEO, executive or thought leader in the cleantech sector. Focused on the clean energy and clean mobility transitions, each guest shares the highs and lows of their cleantech journey, their industry insights, and their vision and hopes for the future.
Hello, I'm David Hunt, CEO and founder of Hyperion Executive Search and your host for the Leaders in Cleantech podcast. I hope you're all safe and well. We have another great guest for you this week, but before I introduce her, I'd just like to share with you that the team at Hyperion Executive Search are looking to expand our teams in Germany and the US in particular. So if you are an outstanding executive search professional or you know one, please do let me know. Our board, C-suite and mid to senior teams are all busy and growing, so please do reach out if that's of interest or if you know somebody for whom it could be. Now on to my guest. I'm delighted to be joined by Lubomila Jordanova, CEO and founder of Plan A Earth, a Berlin-based startup developing an end-to-end platform that enables companies to measure, monitor and reduce their environmental footprint and improve their ESG performance. She's also the co-founder of the Green Tech Alliance, a community of 500 plus startups which are connected to over 350 advisors from VCs, media and business who help them with monthly advice and feedback, and I'm very happy to be one of those advisors. Prior to Plan A, she worked in investment banking, venture capital and fintech in Asia and in Europe. She was recently announced as Marshall Fund Fellow for 2021 and one of the top 100 women in Germany 2020. She's a Forbes 30 under 30 alumni for 2020. An all-round great background, which I'm sure we'll dive into right now and share some of her thoughts, experiences and what she's been up to and what she's looking to achieve. I hope you enjoy the episode. Hello and welcome to the Leaders in Cleantech podcast, Lubomila.
Hi, David. It's a pleasure.
It's been a while, but it's good to have you with us. It's fair to say it's been a pretty dynamic year for you already with growth and investment, and there's lots there for us to talk about, but it's customary for us to share a little bit of the backstory of our guests. So perhaps you can share a little bit of when, why, and how you came to co-found Plan A Earth.
Well, first of all, I would like to say thank you. I've always been really fond of the work that you've been doing, so really appreciate to be having this conversation today. When, why, how, I think it's kind of a bit of a long story. There was a lot of serendipity involved, a lot of enthusiasm, and I would say a bit of a shock. In 2016, I was having a wonderful life in fintech. CEO of that stage, quite of a huge already fintech startup that is now doing fantastically well. And what ended up happening was that I quickly had to learn about climate change and pollution after a trip in Morocco. And that was a trigger. It was not necessarily this aha Hollywood moment where I leave my job on the same day and I don't want to see anything else but climate change related topics. But I was so surprised by the disregard that people had for nature in this place that was economically benefiting from that. So ended up going back to London and spending a whole year more or less after work and in my free time educating myself about the topic. And after that I quit. And this is how Plan A started. Okay.
But how did the idea then show me about the technology? So Plan A has, well, let's go back. I mean, there were lots of technologies and tools that we need to leverage to deploy to really address the monumental challenge ahead of us. But Plan A's platform, tell us a little bit about, firstly, your mission, which I guess we'll get a little bit of an idea about that already. But if you can share a mission behind the company, and then exactly what does the platform do? What does it enable? And what type of clients do you work with?
So the software aims to contribute to the carbon negative economy that we need to shift towards worldwide. The software does in practice is it supports companies predominantly on the larger side in calculating their carbon emissions and also monitoring their ESG performance, and essentially teaches them through the use of algorithms on how they can improve their performance, be it on the environmental or on the social and governance side.
Okay, so that's quite a complex platform, and obviously it's not something which is written or coded overnight, I'm quite sure. So again, perhaps you can share a little bit of how the company came about and how many you are now, and perhaps again some examples maybe of some of the clients, or if you can't share the names, at least some of the adaptations they've made on the strength of using the platform.
Of course, yeah. Well, it's definitely not something that came overnight. We've been working on the software itself for the last 3 years, and it's a piece of work that involves a lot of scientific knowledge as well as a lot of machine learning knowledge. I'm really lucky to have an in-house scientific team that comes from some of the most reputable institutes like Potsdam Institute for Climate Research. We also have a lot of people in partnership with us working on the same topic from Yale, MIT, and others, and that supports the development of the product. And what essentially it does, it enables companies to really tap into another layer of analysis that they normally don't look at, even though they have the data that can really give them this kind of insight. So we look into the existing data systems of a company or the data that they have about their also the things that they purchase, and essentially add another layer to say this data into environmental insights and show them how they're negatively impacting our planet and how this can be improved. Some of the clients we work with, quite a big chunk of them are in the financial sector. We work with a lot of banks. We work with a lot of financial institutions, VCs, private equity companies. We also work with, I would say, complex corporates working in the construction space. We work with a company called Vinci. It's an example that might be recognizable for many that live in Europe or in Africa, as it's the biggest road maintenance company in Europe, also owns energy companies and so on. We work also with fashion, and finally with mobility. And in this whole bit, we also have some fast growing, scaling tech companies. It's a wild mix, but we have been developing this product for quite a while. So we have been able to develop modules that are specific to.
Right. Right. Now, there are many drivers, of course, for businesses to engage. Hopefully, a lot of that is fairly altruistic and just recognizing that they need to do something. But I know from experience that often that's not the primary driver. So what are some of the drivers that your clients do come to you or do open their door to discussion with Plan A around? Is there carbon trading, emissions trading? What are some of the sort of advantages that they gain aside from knowing that they're doing the right thing?
I think it's quite of an interesting mix these days. On one hand, we have a lot of regulation that is coming in place, especially in Europe, and that is for the first time in any of these technological revolutions that we've gone through, been driving really the agenda. Normally, this happens as a secondary move because government is not moving as fast. In this case, we have them behind the back of our mission. The second factor is about the consumer preferences. This might seem quite fluffy for many that are, let's say, B2B, heavy machinery and so on. But the truth is that it trickles down to them as well, because then this leads to the third category, the investors. And that's the third reason why actually we see a lot of movement in the market, looking into supporting something that for them allows scalability, but durability as well. So that's essentially this focus on sustainability. These three factors are the main ones that actually push the companies that we work with to do something. And essentially that is more than enough to supply, I would say, not only the work of Plan A, but also of a lot of even consultants and others, which is making the whole industry quite active at this moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly been really refreshing to see a real drive in the last 2 or 3 years around corporates engaging in not just renewable energy, but other sort of high impact activities as well. But it's always been something that's kind of, I wouldn't say it's bothered me, but for example, as a company at Hyperion, we offset all of the emissions of our company and of our individual employees. And whilst I think offsetting is good, clearly, we fly a lot when we're able to and need to address that in some way. But sometimes I feel that it can be a little bit of an opportunity for companies to avoid making real change, kind of brushing the emissions under the carpet, so to speak. So how does Plan A platform encourage real carbon reduction actions? And what type of actions have you seen in the last few years from some of your clients?
We are quite active in the space of reduction since day one. And the reason for this is that if you look at the scientific evidence, it clearly points out that the only way forward for our planet to really get back to a healthy level is if there's significant reduction in CO2 emissions. So I stand behind what you say in terms of the fact that offsetting is not enough. And what maybe would be useful for the listeners to understand is kind of how offsetting also could be going wrong in terms of like the quality of the offsets, also the transparency, also the amount of money that go into the space itself, because there's a lot of resellers. So quite often a big chunk of the money doesn't go where it has to. With this in mind, we actually have built a team in-house that is focused on decarbonization, and any of our clients that we work with actually first have to focus on reduction, and only then they can compensate. Compensation doesn't only happen with offsetting, but also with carbon capture, also with social impact and sustainable investment projects. So essentially, we don't necessarily focus only on offering the conventional way of looking into compensation, but allow for companies to think of this act as an extension of their impact outside of the boundaries of their organization. So give them essentially a palette of opportunities that maybe is sparking the interest of also their employees, their customers, and it's something that is really tangible. And sometimes offsets are not that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I know that you touched on this already. A lot of corporates clearly are very complex organizations with multiple locations and many sort of facets to the business. And I'm sure that can be challenging. But equally, I know that there's a lot of SMEs and startups that are keen to address and make sure they start their journey on a good foot. We're working with a client who's just actually from Berlin, just expanding to the US, and they've sort of backdated their carbon emission reductions back to when they were founded and still looking to do work. But so they're a scaling business. Do you work with companies who are younger, smaller, perhaps less complex now, but clearly are on a growth phase?
We work with a lot of unicorns or recently established unicorns. So essentially companies that have maybe had like a few hundred employees yesterday, and then now they're in the thousands. This is a really interesting type of client to work with, because that requires a different mindset about what sustainability really stands for. They really need this fundamental kind of methodology and mindset to be shaped in the way the company is built, because with the speed that they're growing, it really doesn't allow for any shift to happen shortly after. So for these kinds of cases, we normally support not only on kind of embedding our system from the beginning so that they can track data and so on, but we also give them a manifesto of sustainability that they can then transpose to their employees and their customers, so that they can involve others on their journey, because otherwise it really becomes a kind of Chinese whisper set of steps that normally get to be taken.
Yeah. So how much of the offering is essentially around providing consultancy, either instead of or alongside the access to the platform?
Well, the main and most important element of our work is the product itself. And the product is quite advanced, so it can cover a wide range of clients and give them kind of quite a lot of functionality without necessarily, beyond an onboarding, the help of us. We also have account managers and so on, but that's kind of the usual. Where we normally take exciting projects that require a bit more hand-holding is when we're entering into a new kind of industry. Getting quite deep into automotive, and the car industry is really not the easiest one to tackle, and it's not something that you just drop product in and you hope for the best. In this particular case, we're really working. We have 2 dedicated people to this particular project, and for that, we're looking into like complex fleet management and also kind of production of cars and so on. So in these kinds of cases, we do consult, but it always needs to lead to something tangible that gets to be transformed into a product element. So that's kind of our approach, and we're really happy in terms of how it allows.
Yeah. No, I think, as you said, there are some industries that are globally complex with the supply chains, and sort of having the data or accessing the data, I think, is critical. But one thing I've heard you talk about before, actually, is going back to what underlies the platform is sort of the massive amount of climate-related data that sits underneath the platform, which enables you to, I guess, or the platform to advise on the best or potential courses of action.
Indeed, yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the most important fundamental elements of Plan A is our scientific team. We've had a scientific team since day one, and this is a really great competitive advantage because it allows us to really have this like granular lens that gives us really deep understanding of what really climate change is and how it can be addressed on an industry, on a country even level.
Yeah.
And since the beginning, we've been collecting a lot of data. We've also developed our own proprietary data sets that are, on one hand, benchmarks where we can give companies an indication how they're performing against others.
Okay.
On
Yeah.
the other hand, we have a lot of data that can navigate the company, how they're doing in terms of waste management, water consumption, influence on biodiversity. So going quite deep into anything but carbon accounting, because the carbon accounting is a given. It's something that you can't skip. It's the main currency in our field. But there's other insights that at the moment we are not necessarily utilizing enough as a planet that would allow us to really understand fundamentally what climate change constitutes of and how we can really effectively act on it when we start establishing these sustainability agendas.
Right. I mean, there's a lot of complexity, Lubomila, in the offering that you have and the platform that you've built. So going alongside that, this year you've grown your headcount. I know you've recently raised, I think about $3 million of further seed funding from Demeter, isn't it, and SoftBank. But what have been some of the biggest personal challenges to you as a leader, CEO, since founding the company?
I think it's a daily roller coaster. This morning, I had one of the most turbulent mornings since, I would say, some months. There's also been quite a lot of, just this dynamism doesn't always turn into something that is super positive and something you can navigate easily. I think on a personal level, that challenge is definitely first of all adapting to COVID in the sense that COVID made us change our target group. We started working with corporates during COVID just because the whole SME focus kind of disappeared. It wasn't appropriate anymore given they lost so many revenues and so on. That also was something challenging more on the team level because we were never this like fully remote company. So that kind of disappeared as an option to be in the physical space. And all of a sudden we needed to learn all these new tactics to engage with one another. And then finally, I would say learning while doing when it comes to fundraising. We've had some previous angel investment in the company. And that was the kind of investment that was definitely more like believing in the vision and so on. But getting US investors on board, getting also Demeter, that is like a very traditional fund on board is quite of a different ballgame because the negotiation, the discussion is a lot more kind of in depth and it requires preparation that at the stage when we were negotiating it, the market was not speaking on our behalf. Because we had to justify a space that did not exist. After we got the funding, there's been like all these thousands of companies that now have, the same business model, have the same offering. But at that point, it was really novel to focus on reduction, to focus on end-to-end platform for carbon accounting, ESG as well. And that has been kind of maybe on a more personal level, the challenges. But I signed up for this, so I guess, we can't complain about things that we knew beforehand about.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, that's one of the great things about everybody's journey and everybody I'm blessed to speak with on the podcast. Really, is that everybody comes in with their own separate challenges, and that it's not for the faint-hearted. But like you say, we do all sign up for it. There's a couple of things there, Lubomila, just to pick up on that you mentioned there. One of which clearly is COVID, and fingers crossed we're hopefully towards the back of that scenario. But now a lot of people are focusing on how they adapt their business models to whatever the future looks like. Hybrid is, of course, talked about a lot. And we're going through that ourselves in terms of how we work. What sort of impact? I guess there's one of which is the internal impact, because you as a business are growing and working remotely. So I'd be interested to get your thoughts on how you've managed to keep the vision and the communication within the company strong. The other, of course, is for your clients' perspective. There's a lot of changes in how they manage their businesses, and therefore that impacts on positively and negatively on their environmental impact. So have you some thoughts on, firstly, how you've managed to keep the momentum and the passion, the vision within your company, and perhaps what your thoughts are on how you see the next 2 or 3 years from a work perspective?
Since day one of Plan A, I have been focused on culture, and I think that has been also maybe my tainted experience of having been in environments which were not necessarily focused on developing really strong culture and kind of this commitment to stable work environment for many and so on. And with this in mind, I think any challenge that we face historically has always been kind of been an obstacle just for a short amount of time until we quite quickly adapt. COVID was an interesting learning about mental health because we had a lot of employees that were like single people living at home by themselves. And we needed to all of a sudden put a lot of emphasis on making sure that their concerns that normally were not even voiced because it was just not a common thing to speak about was made public. It was made something that was at the focus. We're going now through yet another month of mental health sessions, and this is basically something that we financially sponsor for the whole team, where there's sessions with we speak about how to deal with fear. And that is not to say that, we've had like some major outbreaks of people not feeling well. It was more like a prevention method to allow for everyone to be really kind of upfront about things that maybe they have not experienced yet. And that has been something really, I would say, useful. And that has been also supported by this open environment we've developed in Plan A. We had, I think quite the usual palette of things happened at COVID. And I think the fact that we're so close to one another, we're now more than 50 people, but we really like each other and we love spending time with each other, allowed us to really test ourselves in different environments. We did like online games, we had like online drinks, we did a online cooking class where one of our employees, his wives, taught us how to do Indian cooking. So we really went through a lot of different experiments to see what fits, and a lot was taken with a positive response. On the client side, the story has been a bit different. I think we definitely saw how money is the king, in the sense that we thought that we would be focusing on SMEs because they're more nimble and more small, and they would be interested in carbon accounting and sustainability because they care, and the corporates don't have time for that. Totally the opposite happened. We're working only with corporates at the moment, and they're publicly listed companies, predominantly driven by regulatory frameworks that they had to adapt to. I think on their side, probably like the most important change has been, first of all, to understand how to act on that and educate themselves on the way, which is what we help with as well, because sometimes we kind of need to compensate for whatever is not written in the policy papers in a clear business manner. And the second thing was just kind of this hybrid mode, which needed to be reflected also on our product. And that, of course, has been done immediately already in March last year.
Yeah. I think it's just really fascinating to see because so many good things have come from, I won't say good from COVID, because clearly lots of negatives have come from that, but in terms of how we deal with each other and how we recognize within a work environment our mental health issues, our safety around our personal space and all this kind of stuff. So I think there's an awful lot of good that will come, hopefully that will remain. And it's important that we don't lose some of the lessons that we've sort of learned over the last year or so.
I hope so too. I think it's not going to be short-lived, just because the impact of the shock we went through is beyond the imagination of many. And I think just the horror and the sorrow that people went through is something that you can't kind of forget. And everyone has like a personal story to tell about what COVID meant for them. And, it's still ongoing and it's really kind of prominent in so many geographies. So I think we're not going to be short-term sighted in this particular case.
Yeah. No, as you said, there's still a bit of a way to go. I'm going to return to Plan A, but one of the things that where we first actually became involved was through the Green Tech Alliance, and I'm keen to talk to you about that, because along with diversity and greenwashing, which we will move on to, which is I know interesting. Or places where you have some interest. But let's start with the fantastic community that is Green Tech Alliance. I mentor for a couple of accelerators like Foresight and Plug and Play, but I've really enjoyed the engagement with Green Tech Alliance. But can you share a little bit of how and why that came about, and how you find the time as much as anything?
Yeah, first of all, I would like to say thank you for being part of the community and such an active advisor, because it really tangibly changes the lives of all these companies. And it's something that maybe some consider a given because, you have the expertise, you can share it, but it's not. And it's much appreciated. For those of the listeners that don't know about the Alliance, this is a community now of more than 1,000 businesses that work on sustainability related issues, any kind of solution offering alternative packaging, alternative material, alternative process that essentially is offering something more sustainable and effectively something that addresses kind of climate change in one way or another. We set up the community in May 2020, and it was yet again another effect of COVID. We were quite shocked by what happened in March and April. I initiated the first I put together the founding team with the initial concern that I saw from a lot of peers that were building their sustainability companies, and they started getting their term sheets being pulled. They started seeing also employers kind of firing people, employees in companies, seeing how their company is not able to secure certain deals and so on. And all of these friends were sharing these horror stories, and it made me understand that probably there's kind of a big wave of challenges ahead of us. We didn't know at that time that the Green Deal was going to happen, that the EU was going to respond so fast, that Biden was going to be elected. So essentially, there was a bit of a concern that sustainability was going to become secondary because we were going to be economic recovery in the typical terms that only related to economic growth without necessarily looking into these environmental KPIs. And we initially kicked off with 100 advisors in 100 companies, some of which are familiar to many, and many of them have been also on the podcast, some of the most prominent players in the space. And we were just amazed by the response that we got, because it was essentially like this wave of people that was saying, oh my God, I've been so lonely since the beginning of building my company. Yeah. I'm so glad you gave me the chance to find peers and partners and friends. And I remember speaking to someone in Iceland, and she was like, we're one out of the 2 companies in Iceland that focus on sustainability. So yeah, quite of a exciting experience. And yeah, it's super exciting to see where the community is now. Now we have more than 500 advisors, one of which is you, and obviously 100 venture capital funds, 10 organization partners like the UNDP, BMW Foundation, Planet A Ventures, and so on. Have been part of the kickoff and still up to date time, which is don't find in anywhere in any case. So compensating in the cutting corners and other things.
Yeah, I think what's really fascinated about it and really rewarding is that it is a community. As I say, I do work with other accelerators, and they're great. Don't get me wrong. There's some really cool accelerators and incubators around for the clean tech space, and that's excellent. But yeah, that sense of community where people are giving of their time for free and without necessarily an expectation other than supporting one another through, as you say, some difficult times. And it'd be really interesting to see. I mean, did you have particular plans for how the community will grow, or maybe even further internationalize? I know initially it was very Berlin centric, but clearly now has certainly a European focus. I don't know if your thoughts are on further expansion, or whether the platform becomes more of a corporate entity in itself, or what your plans are.
We are extensively expanding across Europe, but also the US, Africa, Asia. There's definitely, this morning I was doing probably like 10 interviews, and there was not a single company from Berlin, which really warmed my heart, because I was like, okay, finally, we're going outside of the bubble. But to be honest, like there's already been, out of these 1,000 companies, like 100 nationalities, and there's quite of a diversity in terms of solutions. I would say exciting. In terms of the vision, we really want to make the support for the companies really tangible. So there's 2 key areas where there's a lot of need for support. One is the financing part, and then the second one is enabling these relationships between corporates, companies to really happen. And that's kind of this matchmaking element related to business opportunities. We're already doing this in a more informal manner on both sides, in the investment and on the corporate side. But the vision is that we really would enable these companies to have business opportunities, tangible investment opportunities, and that is something that we plan on developing for Q3, Q4 this year already.
Super. Well, we'll make sure on the episode webpage, along with obviously direct pointing to Plan A, we'll point to Greentech Alliance, so people can explore that a little bit further. You touched on something there which is important to both of us, I know, and on the strength that the community itself is very diverse, but there's a bigger agenda. At Hyperion, we've been working for quite some time on making, with our clients, of course, to make sure we improve the diversity of talent in their organizations and the diversity of shortlists. Now, we all know that can be difficult in both digital and physical tech, because including clean tech, because a lot of companies, traditionally a lot of people are coming from a very male-dominated environment. And clearly we're not perfect. We've learned a lot, but we've got a lot more to learn. But even so, I think whilst gender, at least now, is a topic, by no means fixed, but it's a topic, things like ethnic diversity and sexual diversity are rarely talked about and could be perhaps more difficult to deal with. So I just wondered how you've addressed the issue at Plan A, and perhaps then any further thoughts or advice you would give on CEOs and founders, because I know you've got a reasonably diverse team yourself, and clearly the involvement with Greentech Alliance as well. But it's still a challenge. What are your thoughts on how we deal with that, or any sort of experiences that you've had that have been, I guess, either challenging or things that you've learned from in this space?
It's an incredibly important question, and I think for Plan A, I can give a few statistics that can shed some light on how we approach the topic. First of all, we have more or less 50-50 men, women. And I need to mention that when it comes to the management level of the company, there's only me that is female, which is really, out of the C levels that we have, and that's like 5 people, it's only me. And
Right.
That's something that has been incredibly challenging. And now we're setting up also quite a few programs specifically to explain how we think about values in Plan A, so that we can attract also this kind of talent. But it's really shocking to observe also, like, how does the market operate. We now launched the job description for head of France. We received like a few hundred applications within within 2 weeks. And essentially what ended up happening was that we didn't have a single woman to apply, which is, to me, not a reflection of reality, because at the end of the day, there's enough women that are doing this kind of work, and probably like we're doing not the right job to be able to attract this kind of talent. A few other statistics about Plan A. So we're a 50-person company, more than 25 nationalities. We also have a lot of diversity in terms of sexual preferences, and that's something that we openly, invite people to speak about if they want to, in the sense that this is, something that has been made, the way things are, and there's no stigma, there's no judgment about it, and this is super exciting because it opens up the minds of people about, the fact that this is an open environment and they can trust the people that they work with, in also on personal level. If I can just finish maybe on the challenge side, like I think what I mentioned about women is something that I don't think is a problem only for Plan A. I see a lot of female founders setting up companies, and this is really exciting. In the Greentech Alliance, I'm sure you've noticed as well, we have so many fantastic women building companies. Yet I feel like there's a missing managerial kind of C-suite level that first of all needs to be nurtured, maybe from the lower level to the higher level of management in the process. But then on the other hand, there needs to be also a lot of not only more action about this, because we've seen it ourselves, and I would have thought that by me being, a CEO that I'm really outspoken about these issues, there would be a lot of an easier kind of process for us to get these kinds of candidates. The truth is that isn't, and I cannot lie about it.
Yeah, no, it is a challenge, and as I say, fortunately, most of our clients do challenge us, and we work with them on it. But there's so much to be done and learnt from. I mean, mostly about that. You touched on openness and just making an environment where it's very visible and very apparent that whatever your gender or ethnicity or sexuality, that you can speak and be accepted. And I think it's starts with things like job descriptions and adverts and all this kind of stuff. And obviously we're happy to advise and share some of our experiences in other platforms. But there's a long way to go. And I think it's great to see companies who are making headway. I know, as you say, there's still work to go, and I think you're quite right. There is often, maybe with the founders, and that's cool. There's a focus on female founders and people like yourself who are real, out there and capable. But there's an awful lot of people who are just as capable, perhaps not necessarily as out there, if that makes sense. And we need to provide, platforms or openness for them to feel that they can fulfill their potential. But it's certainly a huge topic, and thanks for sharing your thoughts. The other thing which I know that you addressed recently, and it's something which I've been a bit outspoken about in the past, and that's calling people out in terms of from greenwashing perspective. And we all know that there are, and we won't name any names, but there are, some very large organizations, oil companies, utilities who advertise and share a great deal in the press of their green credentials, but we know it's a minuscule fraction of their activities. And there's two fronts to that. I think, we do have to encourage these companies to join, and I'm sure a lot of them are, potentially your clients, or can benefit from working with Plan A. But it can be frustrating sometimes when people are making claims that aren't necessarily true. So can you share a little bit about the anti-greenwashing campaign and the mandatory carbon reporting campaign that you launched recently?
Absolutely. So greenwashing is quite of a widely known topic, and I think it's one that creates a lot of different opinions because we still haven't gotten to the level of alignment in terms of the definition of what it really stands for. In the way that Plan A understands it, it's about basically making claims specifically for carbon neutrality that really are not backed. There's exactly for the companies that we show not named. Actually cases where carbon neutrality was called out on scope 1 and 2, and quite a lot, I would say, of discrepancy in terms of what science would expect from these kinds of claims to be standing for. So our campaign had a very simple request, and it was basically setting some foundation and ground rules on what really could be claimed as carbon neutrality and making it punishable on everything else in terms of how you do it. And it was really interesting to see the response that we got because actually, coincidentally, there was a lot of stuff happening in the European Commission. So now there's actually work that is being done on the topic. So quite good timing, and we're super happy to be connected to it. Quite a lot of on the framework that is going to be defining this. And then at the same time in France, the Climate Act happened. I don't know if you heard about this initiative started by a startup that is a friend of ours, and now there's more than 250 companies that signed up, that they basically said we're going to disclose without anyone asking us our scope 1, 2, and 3, just because we think that this is the only way forward to really have a clear path to sustainability. Yeah. And that is essentially the vision that we stand for, that there is enablement for companies to really focus on understanding what they're doing on the environmental topic and how they can adapt. But really giving this transparency, because otherwise we're really going to be lost until all of these claims are not cleared for the fact checking that maybe hasn't happened yet.
Yeah. Again, though, it was great to see that balanced view on things, because as you say, it is a challenge for some of these big organizations that can't change necessarily overnight, but it's around, I guess, the honesty of appreciating where you are in the journey you're on and not trying to hide maybe some things that just for the sake of it. But let's return a little bit to Plan A. It's a huge challenge to retain that sense of mission and culture as you grow. I think every founder know that as you scale, it becomes a challenge in and of itself. And you touched on before that clearly you led the way, or in a lot of this stuff, but there will be a lot of Me Too platforms and companies. So how do you address maintaining the culture as you scale, and how do you stay competitive and unique when there are others coming into the marketplace?
I think it's really important to identify what is the character and mindset that you're building into the company. There's a certain process that is quite natural in a company where the culture develops. And this is something that is inevitable. It's not about the founders. It's not about the first 3 employees. It's about everyone that is at this stage in the company. And everyone has a little part to play. Everyone has really kind of a contribution to make, and they make it inevitably. It's not something that they can necessarily influence or can avoid. It happens in every single small conversation that happens in the company, at every single outing that some members of the team have, and so on. So what we have done to set out kind of a good foundation for this culture to develop in a trajectory that we really align with has been, first of all, to embed like a really positive mindset in the way we do things in Plan A. There's a lot of jokes. There's a lot of kind of engagement in a positive way with the team. We try to laugh a lot. We're dealing with a very complex topic, so I think it requires for us to be incredibly positive, so that we make sure we don't fall into the trap of being really sad for actually climate change stands for. The second thing is that we have a very open culture that is not always the perfect suit for everyone, because people find it like to be like, to the point and like really a bit like German, like maybe it could be quite harsh for someone. But it's something that allows that there's no backstabbing behavior. There's like really a lot of transparency. Like if something doesn't go right, like you just say it. And there's of course a certain tone of voice that you should use, but we don't like to hide things and to like make out of like challenges some beautiful, fluffy, sugar-coated story. And then the final thing is allowing people to grow. I'm super proud to say that, first of all, Plan A is a 5-year-old company, so it's not since yesterday. And then actually, for the first 2 years, it was close to 10 of us. And after that, like things started really like happening for Plan A. And we've only had one person leave since then, since the beginning. And that person left because she got pregnant, and with her husband, they decided to move to Munich. And she's still a fantastic contribution and is even looking forward to coming back to Plan A. So like really this longevity of the commitment is there. And that has only been possible because people that have joined, I've paid a lot of attention, and now there's also other people that are doing that to make sure that these people who joined when maybe just straight out of uni now can become managers, junior sales, maybe in a bit more like mid-level and so on. But really this opportunity is painted for them, and they can imagine themselves as someone that grows with the company.
Right.
And that is something that I at least appreciate, because I think this loyalty allows for really like going through any kind of challenge, be it COVID, be it, other turbulent times that are kind of a normal thing to go through in a company.
Yeah. No, super important. Super important. We've been talking for quite a while, and we could talk forever, but it's customary that I close the podcast with a view of perhaps some of the things that have inspired you, or people that have inspired you initially, whether that's books or people or thought leaders or podcasts or whatever. But are there any places that you would point people to that have either inspired you early in your journey or continue to inspire you when it gets challenging and when it gets tough?
I think something that happened last week, but has been there in my life for many years now, is Jane Goodall. I had the honor last week to interview her, and that was something that was quite of an experience, because she is the goddess. She is someone that has done so much for science, so much for biodiversity, that I think troops of people in their lifetime, including myself, probably we would wish to be able to do, because she fought discrimination. She fought also stigma about science and what actually biodiversity means for science and so on. And that is someone that is really interesting to observe. And if anyone who's listening wants to be further inspired, you should go and check out any video of her, because she really fundamentally speaks about things that all of her conversations with people that quite well define, I would say, the philosophy of life, but also one that is really respectful to where essentially we're headed, and what we need to be considerate of if we really want to preserve the remaining biodiversity in our planet. That's maybe on the maybe kind of more on the inspirational side. There's someone else that I have been having the honor to be in close contact with, and that's one of the senior advisors of Bank of England, Michael Sharon. Michael is someone that is really pragmatic business person. He is, he's been chairman of the G20, but the way he speaks about sustainability is, I would say, quite special, because he allows for this, this reality that we're building at the moment to really be developed in the mind of a business person is something that is totally achievable. And I think this is a language barrier that we have it still between many people that are building sustainability companies and these kind of business decision makers that we're trying to convince. We believe in Plan A that we found a language to speak to many of them, but I think there's still a long way to go if we really want to convince the kind of the ones that are not necessarily there yet. And then something that maybe is just like a funny thing, and probably it's like, I don't know if there's such a tradition in podcasts doing, if you invite other podcasters, but there's a UK podcast called Sustainababble, and it's a comedy podcast for sustainability, but it's really funny because they always like make these silly jokes how they can be, how you can take an industry, make it more sustainable, but what are the pitfalls on the way and so on. But I think you have a fantastic conversation with them. These three people, I guess, or like there are two people actually on Sustainababble. Like these four people are somewhere where I get excitement when I need it.
Yeah, you certainly do need to laugh at times, because it can be at times challenging or depressing if you view things the wrong way. But ultimately, it's inspiring because of so much that is going on from organisations, including yours. So listen, it's been brilliant to spend some time with you, Lubomila. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and for joining us on the podcast. We'll put on the episode page some links to the people you mentioned, and of course to Plan A and to Cleantech Alliance. And wish you every success for the year.
Thank you so much, David. It's really a pleasure.